Iwo Jima, February 23, 1945. The island is still trembling from the night's bombardment. Sulfur stings the air. Shattered rock glows faintly under a veil of smoke. Far offshore, the thunder of naval guns rolls in slow, rhythmic pulses, like an enormous heartbeat counting down to morning. At the foot of a black volcanic rise, one Marine kneels beside a contraption that looks more workshop experiment than regulation weapon. A thickened nozzle welded by hand, fuel hoses lashed with tape scavenged from ammo boxes. The others had laughed the week before, calling it Williams's blowtorch. He'd only smiled, tightening the last clamps. Now he presses the ignition trigger. A hiss answers, a narrow white jet of fire cutting the darkness. The flame catches a bunker slit, then expands, turning the abyss inside orange. The roar swallows his breath, swirls of superheated air twisting like ghosts leaving their shell. Within seconds, the bunker is quiet. Only crackles remain. Behind him, the Marines rise from the ash, disbelief etched in soot. Ahead waits a hill riddled with more holes, each concealing another gun, another death trap. And so begins the climb that would brand his name into Marine history. The flame's first roar demands an explanation, the desperate context that forged both man and machine. By early 1945, the Pacific War had shrunk to a contest of exhaustion. The United States had leapt from atoll to atoll, wresting control of Saipan, Guam, the Philippines, each victory costly, each new island a blood-soaked runway edging closer to Japan's home shores. Yet, between the American bomber bases in the Marianas and the Japanese mainland stood a small volcanic outcrop barely 8 square miles wide. Iwo Jima. Commanders saw it as indispensable. From its 2 airfields, Japanese fighters intercepted B-29s en route to Tokyo. From its beaches, U.S. strategists envisioned an emergency landing site for crippled bombers, a saving step that might rescue hundreds of flyers. The island's capture promised tactical logic. Its defense to Japan held spiritual and strategic necessity. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi oversaw the island's defense. Rather than meet the amphibious assault on the beaches, as Japanese doctrine often dictated, he transformed Iwo Jima into a subterranean fortress. 7 square miles riddled with 11 miles of tunnels, interlocked bunkers, hidden artillery positions, a honeycomb of lava and steel. Soldiers lived buried in the hill, emerging only to fire, then vanish. For the U.S. Marines of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Divisions, this was new terrain. The ground itself burned underfoot. Steam rose from cracks in the rock. Cover was a memory. When they landed on February 19th, ash swallowed their boots. Machine gun fire erupted from invisible slits, metal ghosts haunting the black landscape. Standard grenades, bazookas, and rifle fire barely scratched the reinforced pillboxes. The flamethrower, primitive yet feared, suddenly became not horror's accessory, but survival's key. Among those trained for demolition duties was a farm-raised Marine from West Virginia, Hershel Woody Williams. Short, wiry, practical, and armed with mechanical curiosity, he'd spent his youth tinkering with engines. Now that curiosity would meet necessity. But before his modified weapon could rewrite a battle's course, the struggle for Iwo Jima had to reach the precipice of futility. When even commanding officers doubted that man or machine could pierce Japan's black labyrinth, it was that crucible of terrain, tactic, and despair that forged the need for fire. And to see how such desperation matured into invention, we must step deeper into the island's anatomy and the battle plan that opened it to flame. Mount Suribachi loomed over the southern tip of Iwo Jima like a blackened tooth broken through the sea. To the north stretched a plateau of lava dust, pocked and scarred, hiding a labyrinth unseen from the air. Here, Kuribayashi's engineers had carved out a defense no bombardment could erase. Guns were tunneled deep, connected by narrow trenches and galleries. So when one pillbox fell silent, another took its place unseen. Every patch of ground could kill. American artillery from ships and naval aircraft rained thousands of tons of shells across the island's surface. Yet when Marines stepped ashore, almost no Japanese fire greeted them. For hours, silence. Then at once, eruption. From sheltered embrasures, the volcano itself seemed to spit lead. Entire platoons vanished into craters of dust. Traditional assault methods faltered. Mortars and bazookas destroyed entrances, but not the defenders skulking behind them. Engineers cleared paths at unbearable cost. Within this death maze, flamethrower operators became walking torches of hope and peril. The weapons' backpack tanks, containing compressed nitrogen and volatile gasoline-thickened fuel, were deadly to the enemy and potentially to the man who carried them. A single bullet could turn the operator into a human bonfire. Standard-issued designs, heavy and temperamental, often failed amid the island's grit. In marine workshops by the landing beach, welders and mechanics improvised repairs, modifying nozzles for range or pressure. It was here that Williams, attached to Company C, 1st Battalion, 21st Marines of the 3rd Division, quietly began testing adjustments. Extra pressure here, wider flame cone there. His changes seemed eccentric, even reckless. Some joked he was courting self-immolation. He took the jabs in silence, knowing that a few feet of additional reach might decide whether flame or bullet found him first. Day after day, the Marines crawled forward yards instead of miles. Trapped by intersecting fields of fire, many positions became static deathbeds. Corpsmen worked under shell bursts. Bulldozers reshaped terrain in real time. By February 22nd, after nearly a week of fighting, U.S. gains measured barely 700 yards inland. The operation teetered. Something, or someone, had to crack the hill open. And in that pressure cooker of stalled carnage, multiple angles of struggle. Human, tactical, technological, even moral, began to align toward one explosive solution. Hershel Woody Williams wasn't the archetypal giant Marine of recruiting posters. At barely 5'6", he carried himself with quiet efficiency rather than swagger. Before the war, he drove a farm milk truck through the clay valleys of West Virginia, fixing his own engine with whatever tools were around. That habit, understanding how things worked because they had to, followed him into combat engineering school. When he studied the M22 flamethrower, he treated it less as an infernal device and more as a pressure system prone to clogging and short-circuiting. On Iwo Jima, such scrutiny became priceless. Williams understood that viscosity, pressure, and spark alignment could mean success or failure for a man carrying 70 pounds of volatile weight. His comrades saw a dangerous hunk of metal. He saw variables to be tuned. So he tinkered. He shortened the wand for control, reinforced the hose fitting with scrap clamps. "You'll blow yourself up," someone flung. He replied only with a small grin and went on tightening bolts. Marine doctrine called for flamethrowers to support infantry at short range, coordinated with demolitions. Yet the tunnels of Iwo Jima ignored rulebooks. Fire had to coax defenders from invisible burrows. Each successful flame burst could clear a 10-yard radius, but every operator became an immediate target. In theory, teams rotated. In practice, chaos shredded schedules. Officers soon realized that Williams's willingness to crawl forward alone, fuel tanks glinting like a beacon for enemy gunners, offered something few could replicate: mobility. He moved between covered depressions, scorching bunker openings that pinned entire companies. Squad leaders began planning around his rhythm, advancing only when they saw his fire spill over the next mound. The psychological imprint was unmistakable. His progress became a visible heartbeat of momentum. Day after day, he honed the art of controlled fury. Fire would not simply destroy, it would isolate, flush, and dominate. But technology was the hinge that made such acts possible, and the spark that separated survival from catastrophe. To understand the true potency of that handheld inferno, one must trace its mechanical evolution and consider the unseen adversaries tunneling in darkness, awaiting their fiery fate. Flamethrowers hadn't begun as sleek weapons. The German Flammenwerfer of the First World War was a crude, heavy cylinder with a spray of pure terror. The American M1 series refined its balance and pressure, but not its temperament. The M22 model used on Iwo Jima weighed roughly 70 pounds loaded, enough to slow any man trudging through volcanic ash. 2 fuel tanks fed into a smaller compressed gas cylinder. When the trigger opened, nitrogen forced a syrup-like mixture, often gasoline thickened with a powdered agent called napalm, through the nozzle and into flame. In perfect alignment, the jet reached more than 40 yards, though in battle that distance shrank quickly to 20. Williams knew the limits. His custom fittings, stronger seals, smoothed valves, altered ignition, were a mechanic's rebellion against bureaucracy. It wasn't new science, just soldier improvisation under fire. But that extra reach and reliability meant he could ignite bunkers without crawling directly into their killing arcs. Kuribayashi's men rarely saw the flames before feeling them. From deep firing chambers, Japanese defenders glimpsed only the sudden orange bloom sweeping past the aperture, followed by a low pressure wave and the choking vacuum afterward. Yet they fought with practiced discipline. They'd constructed each pillbox with a rear exit, so survivors could retreat into the tunnels and circle around. Some sealed themselves in when overrun, choosing to die with their guns aimed outward. He shortened the wand for control, reinforced the hose fitting with scrap clamps. "You'll blow yourself up," someone flung. He replied only with a small grin and went on tightening bolts. Marine doctrine called for flamethrowers to support infantry at short range, coordinated with demolitions. Yet the tunnels of Iwo Jima ignored rulebooks. Fire had to coax defenders from invisible burrows. Each successful flame burst could clear a 10-yard radius, but every operator became an immediate target. In theory, teams rotated. In practice, chaos shredded schedules. Officers soon realized that Williams's willingness to crawl forward alone, fuel tanks glinting like a beacon for enemy gunners, offered something few could replicate: mobility. He moved between covered depressions, scorching bunker openings that pinned entire companies. Squad leaders began planning around his rhythm, advancing only when they saw his fire spill over the next mound. The psychological imprint was unmistakable. His progress became a visible heartbeat of momentum. Day after day, he honed the art of controlled fury. Fire would not simply destroy, it would isolate, flush, and dominate. But technology was the hinge that made such acts possible, and the spark that separated survival from catastrophe. To understand the true potency of that handheld inferno, one must trace its mechanical evolution and consider the unseen adversaries tunneling in darkness, awaiting their fiery fate. Flamethrowers hadn't begun as sleek weapons. The German Flammenwerfer of the First World War was a crude, heavy cylinder with a spray of pure terror. The American M1 series refined its balance and pressure, but not its temperament. The M22 model used on Iwo Jima weighed roughly 70 pounds loaded, enough to slow any man trudging through volcanic ash. 2 fuel tanks fed into a smaller compressed gas cylinder. When the trigger opened, nitrogen forced a syrup-like mixture, often gasoline thickened with a powdered agent called napalm, through the nozzle and into flame. In perfect alignment, the jet reached more than 40 yards, though in battle that distance shrank quickly to 20. Williams knew the limits. His custom fittings, stronger seals, smoothed valves, altered ignition, were a mechanic's rebellion against bureaucracy. It wasn't new science, just soldier improvisation under fire. But that extra reach and reliability meant he could ignite bunkers without crawling directly into their killing arcs. Kuribayashi's men rarely saw the flames before feeling them. From deep firing chambers, Japanese defenders glimpsed only the sudden orange bloom sweeping past the aperture, followed by a low-pressure wave and the choking vacuum afterward. Yet they fought with practiced discipline. They'd constructed each pillbox with a rear exit, so survivors could retreat into the tunnels and circle around. Some sealed themselves in when overrun, choosing to die with their guns aimed outward. Their morale combined fatalistic loyalty and engineering genius, proof that fire might destroy bodies, but not immediate resistance. For both sides, the flamethrower symbolized humanity's edge of sanity. Its hiss preceded a different category of sound. Fire consuming oxygen, devouring shadows, erasing shape. Marines who witnessed it confessed later the weapon both saved and haunted them. Williams himself remarked that he avoided looking back at what he'd done until long after. Soldiers spoke of an eerie calm following each burst, as though the island itself exhaled. Yet that fear, when shaped by discipline, became tactical leverage. Fire wasn't vengeance. It was the last language spoken in a subterranean war, and that language reached its defining utterance one gray morning as Williams crawled alone toward the machine gun nests of Hill 362A. The hill waited, silent under the cloud of cordite, poised for the battle's turning point. February 23, 1945. Dawn crept over Iwo Jima's ridges like a pale ember. The air tasted metallic, spent shells, diesel fumes, the faint sweetness of scorched earth. Beyond the shattered ridgeline lay Hill 362A, a seemingly ordinary rise of black wasteland that hid 5 interlocking bunkers and a net of trenches connecting them like arteries inside a beating heart. For 3 days, these positions had halted an entire company's advance. Every frontal attempt met the same reply. The staccato rhythm of Nambu machine guns and grenades dropped through slits invisible until fired. Williams studied the terrain through smoke and grit. 2 Sherman tanks sat immobilized, their treads half buried. The infantry pinned in depressions dared not move. The backlog of casualties filled the medics' stretchers faster than they could evacuate them. Forward momentum had stopped completely. He volunteered again. Command hesitated. His tank of fuel was commandment and curse. Flames could open the field or cook the operator alive. But time was bleeding faster than courage. Finally, a nod. Go. Williams adjusted his straps, checked the pressure, and advanced with 2 riflemen ordered to cover him. Crawling low, he reached the first bunker. From within came the churning sound of a machine gun. He twisted the ignition lever, 1 sharp click, and squeezed. The jet exploded outward, white-orange, bending in wind yet holding shape like a solid beam. It struck the firing aperture, then suctioned inside, filling every corner in a flash of expanding gas. The roar became a living thing, drawing oxygen from the earth itself. Within seconds, the gun fell silent. No counterfire, only the faint crackle of burning oil seeping from the slit. Williams exhaled, muscles trembling from restraint more than fear. He motioned to his riflemen, signaling the move to the next mound. Behind him, Marines glimpsed the rising column of smoke curling against an ashen sky. It wasn't just sight, it was symbol. The impossible bunker had fallen. He crawled again, flame ready, toward the maze above. 3 more fortifications aligned like teeth, waiting in a hunter's jaw. The hill now fully awake, the next minutes would forge among the war's most perilous acts of individual combat. Williams moved forward alone for nearly 4 hours, from mid-morning until afternoon, pausing only to refill his tanks. Each reload meant crawling back across exposed terrain under relentless fire. Hot fuel sloshing against his spine, every step a potential detonation. Marine machine gunners laid covering bursts against openings that spat tracer fire, shielding his daring shuttles between flame and darkness. The second bunker hid cleverly within a half-collapsed trench network. Enemy grenades rolled downhill toward him, fizzling, then bursting in black sand. He ducked, waited, surged forward in the smoke's wake, sending a searing cone through the narrow embrasure. A muffled boom answered. Lava dust leapt 5 feet high. The aperture sagged like melting tar. His escorting riflemen scrambled after him, throwing demolition charges into the ruined entrance. The moment it erupted, their shouts mingled with disbelief. Another strong point gone. Tank flamethrowers had failed to reach this corner, their angles limited by terrain. Williams's human-scale improvisation achieved what armor couldn't. Senior officers later remarked that his path cleared a corridor roughly 70 yards deep, the width of an entire defensive cell. At the third and fourth pillboxes, resistance hardened. A sniper's shot pierced the hose jacket, but missed the pressurized line by an inch. Williams dropped flat, methodically repaired the tear with field tape, relit his pilot flame, and pressed on. He closed to within 10 yards of the final position and unleashed the fuel in short, deadly bursts. Methodical, engineer-precise. Inside, ammunition ignited like a furnace. The explosion rocked the slope, sending a wave of hot wind over his crouched figure. Fellow Marines later testified how he seemed fused to the landscape. Part smoke, part man. A moving flicker of willpower. Every time the flame cut, they advanced. Every roar marked another yard reclaimed from the maze. By midday, 5 enemy emplacements were annihilated. 2 entire Japanese gun crews burned or suffocated. The Marine line surged over the crest, linking with flanking units stalled for days. Hill 362A, once a synonym for stalemate, now lay under American control. Williams stumbled back through the haze, suit singed, face blackened, breathing shallow from fumes. His commander met him in silence, realizing words were unnecessary. The hill was theirs, and the price had been measured in fire. That day's outcome did more than secure a ridge. It cracked open Iwo Jima's southern front, allowing armor and infantry to push inland. But victory's glow was fleeting, its embers revealing both the losses counted in bodies and the unsettling aftermath of flame warfare. When the smoke cleared, the outline of Hill 362A revealed the cost. The once hidden pillboxes were now blistered craters. Metal fittings drooped like wax. The ground, littered with spent casings and melted helmets, seemed more lunar than earthly. The Marines who followed Williams up the slope found not triumph, but exhaustion. A silent, trembling relief that the firing had finally stopped. By nightfall, combat engineers confirmed the corridor secured. The 21st Marines were able to link with the 3rd Division's left flank, closing the vulnerable southern gap. Casualty lists still ran long. Hundreds dead or evacuated in mere hours. Yet for the first time since the landing, the division's map lines showed unbroken progress. Williams spent the evening cleaning residue from his weapon. The nozzle was scorched, one valve fused from heat. He turned it over as though it were a broken tractor part, more concerned about function than glory. Nearby, corpsmen worked under red-filtered lights, treating burns without complaint. News of the feat reached regimental command quickly. Field reports credited Williams with neutralizing multiple enemy strongpoints and reviving a halted advance. When the citation request moved upward, it noted a single Marine employing successive assaults with remarkable gallantry and initiative. Such bureaucratic phrasing could never compress what actually occurred. Hour after hour of crawling into fire's mouth. In later days, he received a field promotion and temporary rest. But rest was relative, the island still alive with hidden gunfire. On March the 6th, he rejoined operations toward the northern sectors, carrying the same repaired flamethrower. The broader front followed his path. Once Hill 362A fell, Marine armor moved northwards toward Motoyama Airfield No. 2. By early March, the ruins of the island's central plateau lay under American control. Fire had broken the stalemate, yet it left the haunting scent of victory purchased at temperature that flesh should never endure. From those scorched rocks, the aftermath radiated outward. First through official recognition, then through doctrinal change shaping how future soldiers would wield controlled flame. In the weeks that followed, Iwo Jima turned into a garrison of ghosts and mechanics. Bulldozers leveled airstrips over ground that still smoked at night. Troops unearthed Japanese tunnels, some stocked with ammunition, others filled with the remains of soldiers who had refused surrender. The casualty reports were staggering. Nearly 7,000 American dead, more than 19,000 wounded. Among roughly 21,000 Japanese soldiers, fewer than 300 were taken alive. It was annihilation by design. Williams's own survival defied arithmetic. When word reached higher command, he was summoned for decoration. First the Navy Cross recommendation, later elevated to the Medal of Honor, presented by President Harry S. Truman that autumn. Photographs of the ceremony show him awkward in polished uniform, the medal resting lightly on the chest of a man more comfortable in utility gear. He dedicated it to the Marines who didn't come back, insisting he'd simply use the weapon because it needed doing. His success also changed how the military viewed the flamethrower. Commanders recognized that smaller portable units, operated by trained specialists working with armor, could breach fortifications faster than explosives alone. In later Pacific operations and even into Korea, the lessons of Iwo Jima informed tactics, coordinated flame and demolition teams, improved fuel mixtures, and protective gear that no longer cooked its wearer beneath volcanic heat. Yet admiration coexisted with discomfort. Flames against human targets unsettled soldiers and civilians alike. Manuals reclassified the weapon strictly for fortification neutralization, an effort to contain moral unease in procedural language. Technicians refocused on napalm bombs and mechanized projectors, designing ways to distance the operator from direct exposure to the inferno he commanded. In the end, Williams's act marked both an end and a beginning. The last large-scale Pacific battle where individual flamethrower operators operated as solitary figures, and the dawn of post-war recognition that courage and horror could occupy the same burst of fire. And when the island finally quieted, the glow of triumph dimmed into reflection on what it means for one person's invention to save comrades, yet sear its creator's mind forever. When dawn returns to Iwo Jima today, it reveals no bunkers, no flame, only wind-carving ripples in the black sand. The airfield hums with peacetime aircraft, and on the southern rise stands a memorial to those who clawed their way upward through fire. Only imagination can fill the silence where the roar once lived. Williams later spoke of that morning in simple mechanics terms. He didn't dwell on fear or triumph, only that the flamethrower worked. Yet beneath his matter-of-fact tone lingered the echo of something deeper. To make fire a tool rather than an end, he'd learned how close usefulness runs to devastation. Power held long enough to protect can just as easily destroy indiscriminately. That paradox defines modern warfare. Technology, born of ingenuity, forces humanity to reckon with the limits of its own invention. On Iwo Jima, every advance came by burning what stood in the way. Metal, rock, sometimes men. Out of that crucible rose both victory and lasting unease. For the Marines, fire meant progress. For the defenders, obliteration. For history, revelation. The hill that consumed itself in flame became an instruction more than a triumph. That courage may look like calculation, and that invention, however desperate, will always mirror its maker. Hershel Williams lived decades beyond that battle, tending to veterans' causes, speaking softly about service, rarely about flame. When he passed in 2022, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Pacific War, his story closed a circuit begun in fire and cooled into remembrance. What he left behind is neither myth nor machinery. It is proof that invention under pressure can tilt history, yet never without personal cost. The hill on Iwo Jima stands as both shrine and warning. When knowledge and necessity unite in one trembling hand, the light they produce can illumine salvation, or burn the world around it. And so, in the quiet glow before sunrise, the island breathes again. The roar is gone, but its lesson endures. That even in war's darkest hour, a single determined mind can turn doubt into decisive flame. And afterward, must live with the echo of its own fire.